Neural Control and Coordination by Dr. Jayachandran Tejas. Chapter 21 Neural Control and Coordination. As you know, the functions of the organ systems in our body must be coordinated to maintain homeostasis. Coordination is the process through which two or more organs interact and complement the functions of one another. For example, when we do physical exercises, the energy demand is increased for maintaining an increased muscular activity. The supply of oxygen is also increased. The increased supply of oxygen necessitates an increase in the rate of respiration, heartbeat, and increased blood flow via blood vessels. When physical exercise is stopped, the activities of nerves, lungs, heart, and kidney gradually return to their normal conditions. Thus, the functions of muscles, lungs, heart, blood vessels, kidney, and other organs are coordinated while performing physical exercises. In our body, the neural system and the endocrine system jointly coordinate and integrate all the activities of the organs so that they function in a synchronized fashion. The neural system provides an organized network of point-to-point connections for a quick coordination. The endocrine system provides chemical integration through hormones. In this chapter, you will learn about the neural system of human, mechanisms of neural coordination like transmission of nerve impulse conduction across a synapse, and the physiology of reflex action. What is coordination in the context of organ systems? Coordination is the process through which two or more organs interact and complement each other's functions to maintain homeostasis. Give an example of coordination during physical exercise. During physical exercise, increased muscular activity raises energy demand, requiring increased oxygen supply, respiration rate, heart rate, and blood flow via vessels. Which systems jointly coordinate organ activities in the body? The neural system and the endocrine system. How does the neural system provide quick coordination? By an organized network of point-to-point connections, enabling swift coordination of organ activities. How does the endocrine system contribute to coordination? Through hormones. 21.1 Neural system. The neural system of all animals is composed of highly specialized cells called neurons which can detect, receive, and transmit different kinds of stimuli. The neural organization is very simple in lower invertebrates. For example, in Hydra it is composed of a network of neurons. The neural system is better organized in insects, where a brain is present along with a number of ganglia and neural tissues. The vertebrates have a more developed neural system. What is the neural system composed of in animals? Highly specialized cells called neurons. What are the primary functions of neurons in the neural system? Neurons detect, receive, and transmit different kinds of stimuli. How is the neural organization in lower invertebrates like Hydra? The neural organization is simple, consisting of a network of neurons. Describe the neural organization in insects. In insects, the neural system is better organized with the presence of a brain, along with multiple ganglia and neural tissues. How does the neural system in vertebrates compare to lower invertebrates and insects? Vertebrates have a more developed neural system compared to lower invertebrates and insects. 21.2 Human neural system. The human neural system is divided into two parts. I. The central neural system, CNS. E. The peripheral neural system, PNS. The CNS includes the brain and the spinal cord and is the site of information processing and control. The PNS comprises of all the nerves of the body associated with the CNS, brain and spinal cord. The nerve fibers of the PNS are of two types: A. Afferent fibers. B. Efferent fibers. The afferent nerve fibers transmit impulses from tissues, organs to the CNS, and the efferent fibers transmit regulatory impulses from the CNS to the concerned peripheral tissues, organs. The PNS is divided into two divisions called somatic neural system and autonomic neural system. The somatic neural system relays impulses from the CNS to skeletal muscles, while the autonomic neural system transmits impulses from the CNS to the involuntary organs and smooth muscles of the body. The autonomic neural system is further classified into sympathetic neural system and parasympathetic neural system. Visceral nervous system is the part of the peripheral nervous system that comprises the whole complex of nerves, fibers, ganglia, and plexuses by which impulses travel from the central nervous system to the viscera and from the viscera to the central nervous system. How is the human neural system divided? The human neural system is divided into two parts: the central neural system, CNS, and the peripheral neural system, PNS. What does the CNS include, and what is its function? The CNS includes the brain and the spinal cord. It is the site of information processing and control. What is PNS comprised of? The PNS comprises all the nerves coming out from the CNS, from the brain and from the spinal cord. What are the two types of nerve fibers in the PNS? The nerve fibers in the PNS are of two types: A. Afferent fibers and B. Efferent fibers. What is the function of afferent nerve fibers? Afferent nerve fibers transmit impulses from tissues, organs to the CNS. What is the function of efferent nerve fibers? Efferent nerve fibers transmit regulatory impulses from the CNS to tissues, organs. How is the PNS further? The PNS is divided into two divisions: the somatic divided neural system and the autonomic neural system. What does the somatic neural system do? The somatic neural system relays impulses from the CNS to skeletal muscles. What is the role of the autonomic neural system? The autonomic neural system transmits impulses from the CNS to involuntary organs and smooth muscles. How is the autonomic neural system further classified? The autonomic neural system is further classified into the sympathetic neural system and the parasympathetic neural system. What does the visceral nervous system comprise? The visceral nervous system includes the complex of nerves, fibers, ganglia, and plexuses through which impulses travel between the central nervous system and the viscera. It is a part of the peripheral nervous system. 21.3 Neuron is structural neural system and functional unit of neural system. A neuron is a microscopic structure composed of three major parts, namely, cell body, dendrites and axon, figure 21.1. The cell body contains cytoplasm with typical cell organelles and certain granular bodies called Nissel's granules. Short fibers which branch repeatedly and project out of the cell body also contain Nissel's granules and are called dendrites. These fibers transmit impulses towards the cell body. The axon is a long fiber, the distal end of which is branched. Each branch terminates as a bulb-like structure called synaptic knob which possess synaptic vesicles containing chemicals called neurotransmitters. The axons transmit nerve impulses away from the cell body to a synapse or to a neuromuscular junction. Based on the number of axon and dendrites, the neurons are divided into three types, i.e., multipolar, with one axon and two or more dendrites, found in the cerebral cortex; bipolar, with one axon and one dendrite, found in the retina of eye; and unipolar, cell body with one axon only, found usually in the embryonic stage. There are two types of axons, namely, myelinated and non-myelinated. The myelinated nerve fibers are enveloped with Schwann cells, which form a myelin sheath around the axon. The gaps between two adjacent myelin sheaths are called nodes of Ranvier. Myelinated nerve fibers are found in spinal and cranial nerves. Unmyelinated nerve fiber is enclosed by a Schwann cell that does not form a myelin sheath around the axon, and is commonly found in autonomous and the somatic neural systems. What are the three major cell body, dendrites, and axon? Parts of a neuron. What is found in the cell body of a neuron? Cytoplasm with usual cell organelles and some granular bodies called Nissel's granules. What are dendrites, and what is their function? Dendrites are short fibers branching out from the cell body, containing Nissel's granules. They transmit impulses towards the cell body. Describe the structure of the axon. The axon is a long fiber with a branched distal end. Each branch terminates as a synaptic knob containing synaptic vesicles with neurotransmitters. What is the function of axons? Axons transmit nerve impulses away from the cell body to a synapse or a neuromuscular junction. How are neurons classified based on the number of axon and dendrites? Neurons are classified into multipolar, one axon, two or more dendrites; bipolar, one axon, one dendrite; and unipolar, cell body with one axon. Provide examples of where multipolar, bipolar, and unipolar neurons are found. Multipolar neurons are found in the cerebral cortex, bipolar neurons in the retina of the eye, and unipolar neurons are usually found in the embryonic stage. What are the two types of axons? Are myelinated and axons? Non-myelinated. Myelinated axons have a myelin sheath, while non-myelinated axons lack this sheath. What envelops myelinated nerve fibers, and what are the gaps between them called? Myelinated nerve fibers are enveloped by Schwann cells which form myelin sheaths. The gaps between two adjacent myelin sheaths are called nodes of Ranvier. Where are myelinated nerve fibers typically found? Spinal and cranial nerves. Where are unmyelinated nerve fibers commonly found? Autonomous and somatic neural systems. 21.3.1 Generation and conduction of nerve impulse neurons are excitable cells because their membranes are in a polarized state. Do you know why the membrane of a neuron is polarized? Different types of ion channels are present on the neural membrane. These ion channels are selectively permeable to different ions. When a neuron is not conducting any impulse, i.e., resting, the axonal membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ions, K, and nearly impermeable to sodium ions, Na+. Similarly, the membrane is impermeable to negatively charged proteins present in the axoplasm. Consequently, the axoplasm inside the axon contains high concentration of K+ and negatively charged proteins and low concentration of Na+. In contrast, the fluid outside the axon contains a low concentration of K+, a high concentration of Na+, and thus form a concentration gradient. These ionic gradients across the resting membrane are maintained by the active transport of ions by the sodium-potassium pump, which transports 3++ Na outwards for 2K into the cell. As a result, the outer surface of the axonal membrane possesses a positive charge while its inner surface becomes negatively charged and therefore is polarized. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called as the resting potential. You might be curious to know about the mechanisms of generation of nerve impulse and its conduction along an axon. When a stimulus is applied at a site, Figure 21.2 e.g., point A, on the polarized membrane, the membrane at the site A becomes freely permeable to Na+. This leads to a rapid influx of Na+, followed by the reversal of the polarity at that site, i.e., the outer surface of the membrane becomes negatively charged and the inner side becomes positively charged. The polarity of the membrane at the site A is thus reversed, and hence depolarized. The electrical potential difference across the plasma membrane at the site A is called the action potential, which is in fact termed as a nerve impulse. At sites immediately ahead, the axon, e.g., site B, membrane has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on its inner surface. As a result, a current flows on the inner surface from site A to site B. On the outer surface, current flows from site B to site A, Figure 21.2, to complete the circuit of current flow. Hence, the polarity at the site is reversed, and an action potential is generated at site B. Thus, the impulse, action potential, generated at site A arrives at site B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon and consequently the impulse is conducted. The rise in the stimulus-induced permeability to Na+ is extremely short-lived. It is quickly followed by a rise in permeability to K+. Within a fraction of a second, K+ diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation, and the fiber becomes once more responsive to further stimulation. Why are neurons considered excitable cells? Neurons are excitable cells because their membranes are in a polarized state. What causes the polarization of neuron membrane? Selective permeability of ion channels, maintaining ionic gradients across the membrane. Describe the ion permeability of the axonal membrane during resting state. During resting, the axonal membrane is permeable to potassium ions, K+, impermeable to sodium ions, Na+, impermeable to negatively charged proteins present in the axoplasm. What is the composition of the axoplasm inside the axon during resting? High concentration of K+ and negatively charged proteins, with a low concentration of Na+. What is the composition of the fluid outside the neural membrane during resting? The fluid outside the axon has a low concentration of K+ and a high concentration of Na+. What maintains the ionic gradients across the resting membrane? The sodium-potassium pump, which actively transports 3 Na+ outwards for 2 K+ into the cell. What is the result of the sodium-potassium pump's activity on the axonal membrane? The outer surface of the axonal membrane becomes positively charged, and its inner surface becomes negatively charged, resulting in polarization. What is the electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane called? The resting potential. You might be curious to know about the mechanisms of generation of nerve impulse and its conduction along an axon. When a stimulus is applied at a site, Figure 21.2 e.g., point A, on the polarized membrane, the membrane at the site A becomes freely permeable to Na+. This leads to a rapid influx of Na+, followed by the reversal of the polarity at that site, i.e., the outer surface of the membrane becomes negatively charged and the inner side becomes positively charged. The polarity of the membrane at the site A is thus reversed and hence depolarized. The electrical potential difference across the plasma membrane at the site A is called the action potential, which is in fact termed as a nerve impulse. At sites immediately ahead, the axon, e.g., site B, membrane has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on its inner surface. As a result, a current flows on the inner surface from site A to site B. On the outer surface, current flows from site B to site A, figure 21.2, to complete the circuit of current flow. Hence, the polarity at the site is reversed, and an action potential is generated at site B. Thus, the impulse, action potential, generated at site A arrives at site B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon and consequently the impulse is conducted. The rise in the stimulus-induced permeability to Na+ is extremely short-lived. It is quickly followed by a rise in permeability to K+. Within a fraction of a second, K+ diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation, and the fiber becomes once more responsive to further stimulation. What triggers the generation of a nerve impulse along an axon? Nerve impulse is triggered by applying a stimulus to a membrane, making it permeable to Na+. This leads to a rapid influx of Na+. This leads to a reversal of membrane polarity, inside positive and outside negative, termed depolarization. Depolarization at site of stimulus leads to what recording in the electric potential difference across the plasma membrane? Action potential, which is essentially a nerve impulse. How does nerve impulse propagate? A current flows on the inner surface from site A to site B. On the outer surface, current flows from site B to site A to complete the circuit. Hence, the polarity at site B is reversed, and thus we can say that an action potential has now been generated at site B. Thus, the impulse, action potential, generated at site A has now arrived at site B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon, and that is how the impulse is conducted. The action potential is extremely short-lived. It is quickly followed by a rise in permeability to K+, which goes from inside to outside. This restores the resting potential of the membrane and the fiber becomes once more responsive to further stimulation. 21.3.2 Transmission of impulses. A nerve impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another through junctions called synapses. A synapse is formed by the membranes of a presynaptic neuron and a post-synaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. There are two types of synapses, namely, electrical synapses and chemical synapses. At electrical synapses, the membranes of pre- and postsynaptic neurons are in very close proximity. Electrical current can flow directly from one neuron into the other across these synapses. Transmission of an impulse across electrical synapses is very similar to impulse conduction along a single axon. Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than that across a chemical synapse. Electrical synapses are rare in our system. At a chemical synapse, the membranes of the pre- and postsynaptic neurons are separated by a fluid-filled space called synaptic cleft, figure 21.3. Do you know how the presynaptic neuron transmits an impulse, action potential, across the synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic neuron? Chemicals called neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of impulses at these synapses. The axon terminals contain vesicles filled with these neurotransmitters. When an impulse, action potential, arrives at the axon terminal, it stimulates the movement of the synaptic vesicles towards the membrane where they fuse with the plasma membrane and release their neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. The released neurotransmitters bind to their specific receptors, present on the postsynaptic membrane. This binding opens ion channels, allowing the entry of ions which can generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. The new potential developed may be either excitatory or inhibitory. How is a nerve impulse transmitted from one neuron to another? Nerve impulses are transmitted through junctions called synapses, formed by the membranes of presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons. What are the two types of synapses, and how are they different? The two types of synapses are electrical synapses, where membranes are in close proximity, and chemical synapses, where a synaptic cleft separates the membranes. How does impulse transmission occur at electrical synapses? At electrical synapses, electrical current can flow directly from one neuron to another. Transmission is similar to impulse conduction along a single axon, and it is faster than at chemical synapses. Which synapse is rare in our system but faster in impulse transmission? Electrical synapses are rare in our system but transmit impulses faster than chemical synapses. What separates the membranes of pre- and postsynaptic neurons at a chemical synapse? The membranes are separated by a fluid-filled space called the synaptic cleft. Chemical synapse? How does the presynaptic neuron transmit an impulse across the synaptic cleft? Neurotransmitters, chemicals in vesicles at axon terminals, are released into the synaptic cleft when an impulse arrives. They bind to receptors on the postsynaptic membrane. How does an impulse, action potential, reaching the presynaptic terminal, axon terminal, lead to release of neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft? The impulse, action potential, stimulates the movement of synaptic vesicles towards the membrane, releasing neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. How do neurotransmitters affect the postsynaptic neuron? Neurotransmitters binding to postsynaptic receptors open ion channels, allowing the entry of ions that can generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. What are the two possible outcomes of the new potential developed in the postsynaptic neuron? The new potential developed may be either excitatory or inhibitory. 21.4 Central Neural System. The brain is the central information processing organ of our body and acts as the command and control system. It controls the voluntary movements, balance of the body, functioning of vital involuntary organs, e.g., lungs, heart, kidneys, etc., thermoregulation, hunger and thirst, circadian, 24-hour, rhythms of our body, activities of several endocrine glands and human behavior. It is also the site for processing of vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotions and thoughts. The human brain is well protected by the skull. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by cranial meninges consisting of an outer layer called dura mater, a very thin middle layer called arachnoid and an inner layer, which is in contact with the brain tissue, called pia mater. The brain can be divided into three major parts: I, forebrain, E, midbrain, and E, hindbrain. Figure 21.4. What role does the brain play in the human body? Central information processing organ, acting as the command and control system. What are the functions controlled by the brain? The brain controls voluntary movements, balance, involuntary organ functions, lungs, heart, kidneys, thermoregulation, hunger, thirst, circadian rhythms, activities of endocrine glands, and human behavior. What activities are processed? The brain processes vision, hearing, speech, memory. In the brain, intelligence, emotions, and thoughts. How is the human brain protected? The human brain is well protected by the skull and covered by cranial meninges, including dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. What are the three major parts of the brain? The three major parts of the brain are I, forebrain, E, midbrain, and E, hindbrain. 21.4.1 Forebrain. The forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus and hypothalamus. Figure 21.4. Cerebrum forms the major part of the human brain. A deep cleft divides the cerebrum longitudinally into two halves, which are termed as the left and right cerebral hemispheres. The hemispheres are connected by a tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum. The layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere is called cerebral cortex and is thrown into prominent folds. The cerebral cortex is referred to as the gray matter due to its grayish appearance. The neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas and large regions that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. These regions, called as the association areas, are responsible for complex functions like intersensory associations, memory and communication. Fibers of the tracts are covered with the myelin sheath, which constitute the inner part of cerebral hemisphere. They give an opaque white appearance to the layer and, hence, is called the white matter. The cerebrum wraps around a structure called thalamus, which is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. Another very important part of the brain called hypothalamus lies at the base of the thalamus. The hypothalamus contains a number of centers which control body temperature, urge for eating and drinking. It also contains several groups of neurosecretory cells, which secrete hormones called hypothalamic hormones. The inner parts of cerebral hemispheres and a group of associated deep structures like amygdala, hippocampus, etc., form a complex structure called the limbic lobe or limbic system. Along with the hypothalamus, it is involved in the regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotional reactions, e.g., excitement, pleasure, rage and fear, and motivation. What are the components of the forebrain? The forebrain comprises the cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. What is the major part of forebrain? The cerebrum forms the major part of the forebrain. How is the cerebrum divided, and what connects its hemispheres? The cerebrum is divided into left and right cerebral hemispheres, connected by a tract of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. What is the cerebral cortex, and why is it called gray matter? The cerebral cortex is the layer on the outer part of the cerebral hemispheres. It is known as gray matter due to its grayish appearance, resulting from concentration of neuron cell bodies. Which part of brain has prominent folds? Cerebral cortex. What functions are associated with the cerebral cortex? The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas, and association areas responsible for complex functions like intersensory associations, memory, and communication. What gives the white appearance to the inner part of cerebral hemispheres? The inner part of cerebral hemispheres, made of fiber tracts covered by myelin sheaths, appears white and is called white matter. What is the thalamus, and what role does it play? It is a structure wrapped around by the cerebrum. It is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. Where is the hypothalamus located, and what functions does it control? The hypothalamus lies at the base of the thalamus. Functions controlling body temperature, urge for eating and drinking. Secretes hypothalamic hormones. What forms the limbic lobe or limbic system? The limbic lobe or limbic system is formed by the inner parts of cerebral hemispheres and deep structures like amygdala, hippocampus, etc. What is the role of the limbic system? The limbic system, along with the hypothalamus, is involved in regulating sexual behavior, expressing emotional reactions, excitement, pleasure, rage, fear, and motivating various behaviors. 21.4.2 Midbrain. The midbrain is located between the thalamus, hypothalamus of the forebrain and pons of the hindbrain. A canal called the cerebral aqueduct passes through the midbrain. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of 4 round swellings, lobes, called corpora quadrigemina. Where is the midbrain located? The midbrain is located between the thalamus, hypothalamus of the forebrain and the pons of the hindbrain. What canal passes through the midbrain? The midbrain contains a canal known as the cerebral aqueduct. What structures are found in the dorsal portion of the midbrain? The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of 4 round swellings, lobes, called corpora quadrigemina. 21.4.3 Hindbrain. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum and medulla, also called the medulla oblongata. Pons consists of fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. Cerebellum has very convoluted surface in order to provide the additional space for many more neurons. The medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. The medulla contains centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes and gastric secretions. 3 major regions make up the brainstem: midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata. Brainstem forms the connections between the brain and spinal cord. What structures make up the hindbrain? The hindbrain comprises the pons, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata. What is the function of the pons? The pons consists of fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. Why does the cerebellum have a convoluted surface? The cerebellum has a convoluted surface to provide additional space for many more neurons. What does medulla connect to? The medulla is connected to the spinal cord. What functions are controlled by the medulla? The medulla contains centers that control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. What are the 3 major regions of the brainstem? The 3 major regions of the brainstem are the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. What is the collective role of the brainstem? Forms connections between the brain, the brainstem, and the spinal cord. 21.5 Reflex action and reflex arc. You must have experienced a sudden withdrawal of a body part which comes in contact with objects that are extremely hot, cold-pointed, or animals that are scary or poisonous. The entire process of response to a peripheral nervous stimulation, that occurs involuntarily, i.e., without conscious effort or thought, and requires the involvement of a part of the central nervous system, is called a reflex action. The reflex pathway comprises at least one afferent neuron, receptor, and one efferent, effector or exciter, neuron appropriately arranged in a series, figure 21.5. The afferent neuron receives signal from a sensory organ and transmits the impulse via a dorsal nerve route into the CNS, at the level of spinal cord. The efferent neuron then carries signals from CNS to the effector. The stimulus and response thus forms a reflex arc as shown below in the knee-jerk reflex. You should carefully study figure 21.5 to understand the mechanism of a knee-jerk reflex. What is a reflex action? A reflex action is the involuntary, that is, occurring without conscious effort or thought, response to peripheral nervous stimulation involving a part of the central nervous system. Describe the components of a reflex pathway. The reflex pathway includes at least one afferent neuron, receptor, and one efferent neuron, effector or exciter, arranged in a series. What does the afferent neuron do in a reflex pathway? The afferent neuron receives signals from a sensory organ and transmits the impulse via a dorsal nerve route into the central nervous system, CNS, at the level of the spinal cord. What is the role of the efferent neuron in a reflex pathway? The efferent neuron carries signals from the CNS to the effector, executing the response to the stimulus. What forms a reflex arc? A reflex arc is formed by the stimulus and response carried by at least one afferent neuron and one efferent neuron arranged in series. Can you explain the knee-jerk reflex as an example? In the knee-jerk reflex, the afferent neuron receives signals from a sensory organ, muscle spindle, in the knee, and the efferent neuron transmits signals from the spinal cord to the muscles, causing the knee to jerk. 21.6 Sensory reception and processing. Have you ever thought, how do you feel the climatic changes in the environment? How do you see an object and its color? How do you hear a sound? The sensory organs detect all types of changes in the environment and send appropriate signals to the CNS, where all the inputs are processed and analyzed. Signals are then sent to different parts, centers of the brain. This is how you can sense changes in the environment. Sense organs: we smell things by our nose, taste by tongue, hear by ear, and see objects by eyes. The nose contains mucus-coated receptors which are specialized for receiving the sense of smell and called olfactory receptors. These are made up of olfactory epithelium that consists of three kinds of cells. The neurons of the olfactory epithelium extend from the outside environment directly into a pair of broad bean-sized organs, called olfactory bulb, which are extensions of the brain's limbic system. Both nose and tongue detect dissolved chemicals. The chemical senses of gustation, taste, and olfactory, smell, are functionally similar and interrelated. The tongue detects tastes through taste buds, containing gustatory receptors. With each taste of food or sip of drink, the brain integrates the differential input from the taste buds and a complex flavor is perceived. In the following sections, you will be introduced to the structure and functioning of the eye, sensory organ for vision, and the ear, sensory organ for hearing. How do sensory organs contribute to our perception of the environment? Sensory organs detect changes in the environment and send signals to the central nervous system, CNS, where inputs are processed and analyzed. What are the sensory organs responsible for different senses? The nose, smell, tongue, taste, ear, hearing, and eyes, vision, are sensory organs responsible for different senses. How does the nose smell? The nose contains olfactory receptors in the olfactory epithelium, detecting smells and sending signals to the olfactory bulb, an extension of the brain's limbic system. What are taste buds, and how do they function? Taste buds on the tongue contain gustatory receptors. With each taste, the brain integrates input from taste buds to perceive a complex flavor. Which senses are functionally similar and related? The chemical senses of gustation, taste, and olfaction, smell, are functionally similar and interrelated. 21.6.1 IR paired eyes are located in sockets of the skull called orbits. A brief account of structure and functions of the human eye is given in the following sections. 21.6.1.1 Parts of an eye. The adult human eyeball is nearly a spherical structure. The wall of the eyeball is composed of three layers, figure 21.6. The external layer is composed of a dense connective tissue and is called the sclera. The anterior portion of this layer is called the cornea. The middle layer, choroid, contains many blood vessels and looks bluish in color. The choroid layer is thin over the posterior two-thirds of the eyeball, but it becomes thick in the anterior part to form the ciliary body. The ciliary body itself continues forward to form a pigmented and opaque structure called the iris, which is the visible colored portion of the eye. The eyeball contains a transparent crystalline lens which is held in place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body. In front of the lens, the aperture surrounded by the iris is called the pupil. The diameter of the pupil is regulated by the muscle fibers of iris. The inner layer is the retina, and it contains 3 layers of neural cells from inside to outside: ganglion cells, bipolar cells, and photoreceptor cells. There are 2 types of photoreceptor cells, namely, rods and cones. These cells contain the light-sensitive proteins called the photopigments. The daylight, photopic, vision and color vision are functions of cones, and the twilight, scotopic, vision is the function of the rods. The rods contain a purplish-red protein called the rhodopsin or visual purple, which contains a derivative of vitamin A in the human eye. There are 3 types of cones which possess their own characteristic photopigments that respond to red, green and blue lights. The sensations of different colors are produced by various combinations of these cones and their photopigments. When these cones are stimulated equally, a sensation of white light is produced. The optic nerves leave the eye and the retinal blood vessels enter it at a point medial to and slightly above the posterior pole of the eyeball. Photoreceptor cells are not present in that region, and hence it is called the blind spot. At the posterior pole of the eye lateral to the blind spot, there is a yellowish pigmented spot called macula lutea with a central pit called the fovea. The fovea is a thinned out portion of the retina where only the cones are densely packed. It is the point where the visual acuity, resolution, is the greatest. The space between the cornea and the lens is called the aqueous chamber and contains a thin watery fluid called aqueous humor. The space between the lens and the retina is called the vitreous chamber and is filled with a transparent gel called vitreous humor. 21.6.1.2 Mechanism of vision. The light rays in visible wavelength focused on the retina through the cornea and lens generate potentials, impulses, in rods and cones. As mentioned earlier, the photosensitive compounds, photopigments, in the human eyes is composed of opsin, a protein, and retinol, an aldehyde of vitamin A. Light induces dissociation of the retinol from opsin, resulting in changes in the structure of the opsin. This causes membrane permeability changes. As a result, potential differences are generated in the photoreceptor cells. This produces a signal that generates action potentials in the ganglion cells through the bipolar cells. These action potentials, impulses, are transmitted by the optic nerves to the visual cortex area of the brain, where the neural impulses are analyzed and the image formed on the retina is recognized based on earlier memory and experience. Where are the paired eyes located in the human body? The paired eyes are located in sockets of the skull called orbits. What is the general shape of the adult human eyeball? The adult human eyeball is nearly a spherical structure. How many layers compose the wall of the eyeball, and what are they? The wall of the eyeball is composed of 3 layers: the external layer, sclera, the middle layer, choroid, and the internal layer, retina. What is the external layer of the eyeball, what is its composition, and what is its anterior portion called? The external layer is made of dense connective tissue and is called the sclera, and its anterior portion is called the cornea. Describe the choroid layer and its appearance. The choroid layer contains many blood vessels and looks bluish in color. It is thin over the posterior 2/3 but thickens in the anterior part to form the ciliary body and then continues as the iris. What structure continues forward from the ciliary body, forming the visible colored? The ciliary body continues forward to form the pigmented and opaque structure called the iris, which is the visible colored portion of the eye. Portion of the eye? What is the transparent structure held in place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body? A transparent crystalline lens is held in place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body. What is the aperture in front of the lens called, and what surrounds it? The aperture in front of the lens is called the pupil, and it is surrounded by the iris. What regulates the diameter of the pupil? The diameter of the pupil is regulated by the muscle fibers of the iris. What is the innermost layer of the human eye and its composition? The innermost layer is the retina, and it contains 3 layers of neural cells, from in to out: ganglion cells, bipolar cells, and photoreceptor cells. What are the 2 types of photoreceptor cells in the retina, and what do they? The 2 types of photoreceptor cells are rods and cones. They contain light-sensitive proteins called photopigments. Contain? What functions are associated with cones and rods in vision? Cones are responsible for daylight, photopic, vision and color vision, while rods are responsible for twilight, scotopic, vision. What protein is found in rods, and what does it contain? Rods contain the purplish-red protein called rhodopsin or visual purple, which contains a derivative of vitamin A. How many types of cones are there in the human eye, and what do they respond to? There are 3 types of cones in the human eye, responding to red, green, and blue lights. How are sensations of different colors produced in the human eye? Sensations of different colors are produced by various combinations of cones and their photopigments. What happens when the 3 types of cones are stimulated equally? When the 3 types of cones are stimulated equally, a sensation of white light is produced. Where do the optic nerves leave the eye, and where do the optic nerves leave the eye, and retinal blood vessels enter it at a point medial to and slightly above? Retinal blood vessels enter it? The posterior pole of the eyeball. Why is the region where optic nerves leave the eye called the blind spot? The blind spot is called so because photoreceptor cells are not present in that region. What is found at the posterior pole of the eye lateral to the blind spot? At the posterior pole of the eye, lateral to the blind spot, there is a yellowish pigmented spot called macula lutea. What is the central pit in the macula lutea called, and what is its significance? The central pit in the macula lutea is called the fovea. It is a thinned-out portion of the retina where only cones are densely packed, and it is the point with the greatest visual acuity, resolution. What is the space between the cornea and the lens called? The space between the cornea and the lens is called the aqueous chamber. What fluid is present in the aqueous chamber? The aqueous chamber contains a thin watery fluid called aqueous humor. What is the space between the lens and the retina? The space between the lens and the retina is called the vitreous chamber. Called? What fills the vitreous chamber? The vitreous chamber is filled with a transparent gel called vitreous humor. What happens when light rays in visible wavelengths focus on the retina? Light rays focused on the retina through the cornea and lens generate potentials, impulses, in rods and cones. What are the photosensitive compounds, photopigments, in human eyes composed of? Photosensitive compounds in human eyes are composed of opsin, a protein, and retinol, an aldehyde of vitamin A. What happens when light induces dissociation of retinol from opsin in the photoreceptor cells? Light-induced dissociation of retinol from opsin causes changes in the structure of opsin, leading to membrane permeability changes. Membrane permeability changes generate potential differences in photoreceptor cells, producing a signal. Action potentials are generated in ganglion cells through bipolar cells in response to the signals from photoreceptor cells. These impulses, action potentials, are transmitted by the optic nerves to the visual cortex area of the brain. What happens in the visual cortex area of the brain? In the visual cortex area, neural impulses are analyzed, and the image formed on the retina is recognized based on earlier memory and experience. 21.6.2 The ears perform 2 sensory functions, hearing and maintenance of body balance. Anatomically, the ear can be divided into 3 major sections called the outer ear, the middle ear and the inner ear, figure 21.7. The outer ear consists of the pinna and external auditory meatus, canal. The pinna collects the vibrations in the air which produce sound. The external auditory meatus leads inwards and extends up to the tympanic membrane, the eardrum. There are very fine hairs and wax-secreting glands in the skin of the pinna and the meatus. The tympanic membrane is composed of figure 21.7 diagrammatic view of ear connective tissues covered with skin outside and with mucous membrane inside. The middle ear contains 3 ossicles called malleus, incus and stapes which are attached to one another in a chain-like fashion. The malleus is attached to the tympanic membrane and the stapes is attached to the oval window of the cochlea. The ear ossicles increase the efficiency of transmission of sound waves to the inner ear. An eustachian tube connects the middle ear cavity with the pharynx. The eustachian tube helps in equalizing the pressures on either sides of the eardrum. The fluid-filled inner ear called labyrinth consists of 2 parts, the bony and the membranous labyrinths. The bony labyrinth is a series of channels. Inside these channels lies the membranous labyrinth, which is surrounded by a fluid called perilymph. The membranous labyrinth is filled with a fluid called endolymph. The coiled portion of the labyrinth is called cochlea. The membranes constituting cochlea, the rhizonas and basilar, divide the surrounding perilymph-filled bony labyrinth into an upper scala vestibuli and a lower scala tympani, figure 21.8. The space within cochlea called scala media is filled with endolymph. At the base of the cochlea, the scala vestibuli ends at the oval window, while the scala tympani terminates at the round window which opens to the middle ear. The organ of Corti is a structure located on the basilar membrane which contains hair cells that act as auditory receptors. The hair cells are present in rows on the internal side of the organ of Corti. The basal end of the hair cell is in close contact with the afferent nerve fibers. A large number of processes called stereocilia are projected from the apical part of each hair cell. Above the rows of the hair cells is a thin elastic membrane called tectorial membrane. The inner ear also contains a complex system called vestibular apparatus, located above the cochlea. The vestibular apparatus is composed of 3 semicircular canals and the otolith. Macula is the sensory part of saccule and utricle. Each semicircular canal lies in a different plane at right angles to each other. The membranous canals are suspended in the perilymph of the bony canals. The base of canals is swollen and is called ampulla, which contains a projecting ridge called crista ampullaris which has hair cells. The saccule and utricle contain a projecting ridge called macula. The crista and macula are the specific receptors of the vestibular apparatus responsible for maintenance of balance of the body and posture. 20.6.2.1 Mechanism of hearing. How does ear convert sound waves into neural impulses, which are sensed and processed by the brain, enabling us to recognize a sound? The external ear receives sound waves and directs them to the eardrum. The eardrum vibrates in response to the sound waves, and these vibrations are transmitted through the ear ossicles, malleus, incus and stapes, to the oval window. The vibrations are passed through the oval window onto the fluid of the cochlea, where they generate waves in the lymphs. The waves in the lymphs induce a ripple in the basilar membrane. These movements of the basilar membrane bend the hair cells, pressing them against the tectorial membrane. As a result, nerve impulses are generated in the associated afferent neurons. These impulses are transmitted by the afferent fibers via auditory nerves to the auditory cortex of the brain, where the impulses are analyzed and the sound is recognized. What are the 2 sensory functions performed by the ears? The ears perform the sensory functions of hearing and maintenance of body balance. How is the ear anatomically divided, and into how many major sections? The ear is anatomically divided into 3 major sections: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. What does the outer ear consist of, and what is its function? The outer ear consists of the pinna and external auditory meatus. The pinna collects vibrations in the air, sound. What is the peculiarity of the skin of outer ear? There are very fine hairs and wax-secreting glands in the skin of the pinna and the meatus. What is the tympanic membrane composed of? The tympanic membrane is composed of connective tissues covered with skin outside and mucous membrane inside. What are the 3 ossicles in the middle ear, and how are they connected? The 3 ossicles in the middle ear are malleus, incus, and stapes. They are connected to one another in a chain-like fashion. To what structure is the malleus attached, and what is its role in the ear? The malleus is attached to the tympanic membrane, and its role is to transmit sound vibrations. What is the attachment of the stapes, and where does it connect to in the ear? The stapes is attached to the oval window of the cochlea, thus transmitting sound to the inner ear. How do ear ossicles enhance the process of hearing? Ear ossicles increase the efficiency of sound wave transmission to the inner ear. What is the purpose of the eustachian tube in the middle ear? The eustachian tube connects the middle ear cavity with the pharynx and helps equalize pressures on either side of the eardrum. What are the 2 parts of the bony and membranous labyrinths? Inner ear? What is the arrangement of bony and membranous labyrinths? Bony labyrinth has a series of channels. Inside these channels is the membranous labyrinth. What is the fluid in the bony labyrinth called? Perilymph. What surrounds the membranous labyrinth? The membranous labyrinth is surrounded by perilymph. Membranous labyrinth is filled with fluid. What is this fluid called? Endolymph. What is the coiled portion of the labyrinth called? The coiled portion of the labyrinth is called the cochlea. What are the names of the 2 membranes in the cochlea? Reisner's membrane and basilar membrane. How are the upper and lower parts of the bony labyrinth? The membranes, Reisner's and basilar, divide the bony labyrinth into an upper scala vestibuli and a arranged within the cochlea, lower scala tympani. What fluid fills the scala vestibuli and scala tympani? Perilymph. What fluid fills the scala media? The scala media is filled with endolymph. Where does the scala vestibuli end, and where does the scala tympani terminate? What are their functions? The scala vestibuli ends at the oval window, while the scala tympani terminates at the round window, which opens to the middle ear. Sound enters inner ear, from middle ear, through the oval window, is transmitted through the cochlea, and exits into the middle ear via the round window. Where is the organ of Corti located, and what is its function? The organ of Corti is located on the basilar membrane, and it contains hair cells that act as auditory receptors. Where are the hair cells situated within the organ of Corti, and in what the hair cells are present in rows on the internal side of the organ of Corti? Arrangement? What is the thin elastic membrane above the rows of hair cells in the organ of Corti called? The thin elastic membrane above the rows of hair cells is called the tectorial membrane. What structures are projected from the apical part of each hair cell? Processes called stereocilia are projected from the apical part of each hair cell. What is the basal end of the hair cell in close contact with, and why is it significant? The basal end of the hair cell is in close contact with afferent nerve fibers, forming a connection for sound signal transmission. Where is the vestibular apparatus located in the inner ear? The vestibular apparatus is located above the cochlea in the inner ear. What are the components of the vestibular apparatus? The vestibular apparatus comprises 3 semicircular canals and the otolith organs, saccule and utricle. What is the sensory part of macula is the sensory part of saccule and utricle. Saccule and utricle. What is its structure? It is a projecting ridge. How are the semicircular canals oriented in relation to each other? Each semicircular canal lies in a different plane at right angles to each other. What is the composition of the membranous canals, and where are they suspended? The membranous canals are suspended in the perilymph of the bony canals. What is the specific structure in the base of the canals, and what does it contain? The base of each canal is swollen and is called ampulla. It contains a projecting ridge called crista ampullaris which has hair cells. What are the specific receptors responsible for maintaining balance and posture by the vestibular apparatus? The crista ampullaris in the semicircular canals and the macula in the saccule and utricle are the specific receptors responsible for maintaining balance and posture. What receives sound waves and vibrates in response to them? The eardrum receives sound waves and vibrates in response to them. Which ear ossicles transmit vibrations to the oval window? The ear ossicles, malleus, incus, and stapes, transmit vibrations to the oval window. In the inner ear, how do sound vibrations lead to electrical impulses? Vibrations in the oval window generate waves in the lymphs of the cochlea. These waves produce ripples in the basilar membrane. Basilar membrane presses against tectorial membrane. This bends hair cells of tectorial membrane. The basal end of the hair cell is in close contact with afferent nerve fibers, forming a connection for sound signal transmission. Where are the nerve impulses transmitted, and what happens in the auditory cortex? Nerve impulses are transmitted via auditory nerves to the auditory cortex of the brain, where they are analyzed, and the sound is recognized. Summary: the neural system coordinates and integrates functions as well as metabolic and homeostatic activities of all the organs. Neurons. The functional units of neural system are excitable cells due to a differential concentration gradient of ions across the membrane. The electrical potential difference across the resting neural membrane is called the "resting potential." The nerve impulse is conducted along the axon membrane in the form of a wave of depolarization and repolarization. A synapse is formed by the membranes of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. Chemicals involved in the transmission of impulses at chemical synapses are called neurotransmitters. Human neural system consists of 2 parts: I, central neural system, CNS, and E, the peripheral neural system. The CNS consists of the brain and spiral cord. The brain can be divided into 3 major parts: I, forebrain, E, midbrain, and E, hindbrain. The forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The cerebrum is longitudinally divided into 2 halves that are connected by the corpus callosum. A very important part of the forebrain called hypothalamus controls the body temperature, eating and drinking. Inner parts of cerebral hemispheres. And a group of associated deep structures form a complex structure called limbic system which is concerned with olfaction, autonomic responses, regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotional reactions, and motivation. The midbrain receives and integrates visual, tactile, and auditory inputs. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum, and medulla. The cerebellum integrates information received from the semicircular canals of the ear and the auditory system. The medulla contains centers, which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. Pons consist of fiber tracts that interconnect different regions of the brain. The entire process of involuntary response to a peripheral nervous stimulation is called reflex action. Information regarding changes in the environment is received by the CNS through the sensory organs, which are processed and analyzed. Signals are then sent for necessary adjustments. The wall of the human eyeball is composed of 3 layers. The external layer is composed of cornea and sclera. Inside sclera is the middle layer, which is called the choroid. Retina, the innermost layer, contains 2 types of photoreceptor cells, namely rods and cones. The daylight, photopic, vision and color vision are functions of cones, and twilight, scotopic, vision is the function of the rods. The light enters through cornea, the lens, and the images of objects are formed on the retina. The ear can be divided into the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The middle ear contains 3 ossicles called malleus, incus, and stapes. The fluid-filled inner ear is called the labyrinth, and the coiled portion of the labyrinth is called cochlea. The organ of Corti is a structure which contains hair cells that act as auditory receptors and is located on the basilar membrane. The vibrations produced in the eardrum are transmitted through the ear ossicles and oval window to the fluid-filled inner ear. Nerve impulses are generated and transmitted by the afferent fibers to the auditory cortex of the brain. The inner ear also contains a complex system located above the cochlea called vestibular apparatus. It is influenced by gravity and movements, and helps us in maintaining balance of the body and posture.